Emily never considered herself superstitious. She was practical, rational, and believed that everything had a logical explanation. When her friend Sarah asked her to take care of her baby, Liam, for one night, Emily agreed without hesitation. Sarah needed to leave for an urgent commitment and, having no one else to care for her son, trusted her longtime friend. Emily arrived at the house around 7 p.m., and Sarah quickly instructed her on the baby's routine. "He's an angel, he'll sleep through the night. If you need anything, the video monitor is here. Thanks, Em, I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah left, leaving Emily alone with Liam. After feeding the baby, Emily put him in the crib and stayed a few minutes by his side, admiring the peacefulness with which he slept. Then, she went to the living room, picked up the monitor, and started watching a movie to pass the time. The house was silent, with only the sound of the television filling the space. Around 11 p.m., as the movie approached its climax, Emily felt a slight unease. She looked at the monitor and, for a brief moment, thought she saw something strange. A shadow quickly passed beside the crib. "It must be my imagination," she thought, trying to dismiss the uncomfortable feeling. She turned her attention back to the movie, but the peace she felt before had disappeared. Minutes later, Emily decided to check the monitor again. This time, the shadow was there, still, right beside Liam's crib. It was tall, slender, and seemed to absorb all the light around it. Her heart raced. She tried to convince herself that it was just a monitor glitch, a reflection, or something like that. But something inside her told her it wasn't that simple. Without thinking twice, Emily dropped the monitor and ran to Liam's room. She burst through the door, her heart pounding. The room was exactly as she had left it, the curtains gently swaying in the night breeze, the lamp glowing beside the crib, and Liam sleeping peacefully. No sign of the shadow. Taking a deep breath, Emily approached the crib, checking to see if the baby was okay. Liam slept like an angel, unaware of what was happening. "I'm really getting paranoid," she muttered to herself. She decided to return to the living room, but not without giving the room one last look. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't leave her. Back in the living room, Emily picked up the monitor, determined to ignore what she had seen. But the shadow was still there, firm, next to the crib. Now, it seemed to be moving, almost as if it was watching the baby. The fear Emily had felt before returned with full force, turning into palpable terror. She could no longer ignore what was happening. Something was very wrong in that house. Emily tried to stay calm. There must be a logical explanation, she told herself, although she knew she was lying. She called Sarah, but the call went straight to voicemail. She left a brief message, trying not to sound terrified. Then, she looked back at the monitor, but the shadow remained there, imposing, as if it were waiting for something. Time passed slowly. Emily didn't know what to do. Each passing second made her more nervous. Finally, she made a decision. She couldn't stay in that house anymore. She grabbed Liam, still sleeping, placed him in the stroller, and quickly left. On the monitor, the shadow seemed to move restlessly, but she didn't look back. She locked the door and stepped outside, into the safety of the world beyond. Emily left Sarah's house and, not knowing where to go, drove to her own home. In the car, she constantly glanced at Liam, who continued to sleep, oblivious to what had just happened. The video monitor was off, thrown on the passenger seat, but the image of the shadow was still vivid in her mind. She could only think about getting home as quickly as possible and escaping the disturbing situation. As soon as she entered her apartment, Emily placed Liam in one of the bedrooms and finally tried calling Sarah again. This time, Sarah answered. "Hi, Em. Is everything okay?" Emily hesitated for a moment before responding. "Sarah, something very strange is happening in your house. I saw a shadow next to Liam's crib through the monitor. It wouldn't disappear. I didn't know what to do, so I brought him here." On the other end of the line, Sarah was silent for a few seconds. "A shadow? Are you sure?" Sarah's voice sounded shaky, as if she was trying to hide something. "Yes, I'm sure. I'm not imagining things, Sarah. Something was there, and I thought it was better to leave." Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something." Sarah started speaking, her voice low, filled with concern. "You're not the first person to see that shadow, Em. I've seen it myself, and so have other babysitters who've cared for Liam. I always thought it was just a trick of the light or something with the monitor, but it seems to be more than that. I don't know what's going on in my house, but I've thought about moving several times. Emily felt a chill as she heard this. Everything made sense now, but at the same time, it seemed too absurd to be true. And you think this shadow has something to do with that? How? How can we be sure? I don't know, Sarah replied, but I'm willing to find out. Maybe it's time to face whatever is happening. Sarah continued, I started researching the history of the house a few months ago, after the first time I saw the shadow. I found out that the house belonged to a family over 30 years ago. Their youngest son died as a baby. No one knows exactly how. Since then, subsequent residents reported strange events, but there was never anything concrete. I didn't want to believe it, until now. Emily felt a lump in her throat. Everything made sense now, but at the same time, it seemed too absurd to be true. And you think this shadow has something to do with that? How? How can we be sure? I don't know, Sarah replied, but I'm willing to find out. Maybe it's time to face whatever is happening. Sarah insisted on returning to the house, determined to confront the mystery. Emily, reluctantly, agreed to accompany her. Liam was left in the care of Emily's mother while the two headed to Sarah's house. When they arrived, the house seemed peaceful, normal. But the heavy atmosphere was present, like an invisible shadow hovering over them. The two entered the house. Emily held the video monitor in her trembling hand. They went straight to Liam's room, where the shadow had last been seen. Sarah, trying to appear brave, turned on the monitor. At first, everything seemed normal, but within seconds, the shadow reappeared, exactly in the same place, next to the empty crib. Emily and Sarah froze at the sight of the shadow. It seemed to pulse as if it were alive. Suddenly, the shadow began moving slowly towards the bedroom door, where the two women stood. Sarah, trying to hide her panic, whispered, "What do you want? Why are you here?" But, obviously, there was no response. The shadow continued to advance. Emily, gripped by fear, instinctively grabbed a random object from the dresser, an old crucifix that Sarah had received from her grandmother. Without thinking, she raised the crucifix toward the shadow, which immediately stopped. The shadow hesitated, trembling as if uncertain, and then slowly began to retreat, disappearing into the darkness of the room. Sarah, still processing what had just happened, looked at the crucifix in Emily's hands. My grandmother always said this crucifix had something special. She was very religious, believed in forces beyond our understanding. The two looked at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. Did it scare the shadow away? Emily asked, still trembling. I don't know, but it seems like it did. The two left the room, the crucifix still firm in Emily's hands. Sarah finally made the decision she had been postponing for months. I can't live here anymore. I'm going to find a place to move as soon as possible. Emily agreed. I think that's the best thing to do. We don't know what this shadow really wants, but it's not worth the risk. Several weeks passed since Sarah's last night in the house. She moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, where she hoped to start anew, far from the terrifying memories. Emily helped her settle in, and gradually, life returned to normal. Sarah was determined to leave the past behind, focusing on creating a safe and healthy environment for Liam. One quiet afternoon, while Sarah was organizing the final details in the new apartment, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Sarah answered, but on the other end of the line, there was only silence. Hello? Who's there? She insisted, but no one responded. Only a faint sound, like a baby crying, echoed through the phone before the call was disconnected. Sarah froze, a shiver running down her spine. It can't be, she murmured to herself, quickly hanging up. Intrigued and slightly frightened, Sarah decided to investigate the source of the call. She called the number back, but was informed that it was out of service. That sense of unease, which she thought she had left behind, began to return. She decided not to tell Emily, at least for now. She didn't want to worry her friend again. A few days later, while Liam was playing in the living room, Sarah noticed something strange in the hallway mirror. An undefined shape, almost imperceptible, seemed to be reflected behind her. She turned abruptly, but there was nothing there. The reflection had disappeared. Sarah's heart raced. No, it can't be her, she thought, trying to convince herself that she was just imagining things. That night, Sarah had difficulty sleeping. When she finally did, she dreamed of the old house. In the dream, she was back in Liam's room, but he was no longer there. Instead, the shadow reappeared, clearer than ever. This time, however, it didn't seem threatening. Sarah could see a feminine figure within the shadow, crying. She was holding something, a baby. In the dream, the figure within the shadow approached Sarah. "I just wanted my child back," the voice said, filled with sadness. "You found him, but I can't stay. I just want him to be at peace." Sarah woke up with a start, sweating and with tears in her eyes. Finally, she understood what she needed to do. The next day, Sarah decided to follow her intuition. She remembered the information she had found about the family who had lived in the house before. She did a quick search and discovered where the baby from the old family was buried. With a sense of urgency, she went to the cemetery, taking the crucifix that had scared the shadow away the first time. Sarah found the baby's grave, marked by a simple, almost forgotten tombstone. She knelt down and placed the crucifix on the gravestone. "You can rest now. Your child is at peace," Sarah said, feeling a strange connection with the mother who had lost her baby so many years ago. As she stood up, she felt a gentle breeze, almost like a silent thank you. The shadow could finally rest. After leaving the cemetery, Sarah felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she truly felt at peace. Returning home, she found Liam sleeping peacefully. "It's all right now, my love," she whispered to the baby, certain that the shadow would not return. The peace she felt now was different. It was final. Sarah never experienced anything supernatural again after that visit to the cemetery. The shadow, with its sadness and pain, had found peace, and so had Sarah. Life moved on, and Sarah and Emily, though still remembering the experience they had lived through, left the shadows behind, focusing on the future ahead of them. The past finally stayed where it belonged, buried and at peace. If this story kept you hooked until now, subscribe to the channel and share it with anyone you know who would also love this experience. But it's not over yet. There are more mysteries to be solved. Get ready for the climax and find out how this story really ends.